Mary Antonia Wood, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast.
Hi, Brian. I'm so glad to be here. I've been looking forward to this. And also, I must tell you, also kind of dreading a little bit.
Ooh, say more.
Yeah, I wonder how many people say that when they
Nobody says
start
it.
out. Okay, maybe I shouldn't have, but here I
Nobody's that honest.
go. Well, yeah, the honest part is that I know we're going to be talking about creativity today, perhaps the parallels between shamanic sensibility and the life path of artists and creators. And there's a lot that has to do with diminishing the ego, with allowing a kind of ego death of taking risks with that, to open yourself up to whatever forces want to collaborate with you. But I think a podcast or an interview or these sort of situations are inherently sort of ego is in there because you're wanting to present your work in its best possible light. Um, you're possibly wanting to encourage people to buy your book or look into the other types of maybe offerings you have in the world. So I'm kind of feeling that tension this morning of the ego coming in, wanting to present my work to you and your listeners in the best possible light, but also wanting to stay open and vulnerable and knowing that um, who knows where the twists and turns may happen. I think that'll probably be part of a more interesting conversation.
Yes, well, and thanks so much for speaking to that. I always try to approach these with as little agenda as possible, with openness, willingness to go with the flow, see where curiosity takes us. And I actually find that when people are too caught up in like thinking about how they're coming across or how they're going to present, or kind of telling the reciting the monologue that maybe they've prepared and recited
Right.
many times, it really interrupts that creative flow, like the collaborative flow. So um, yeah, I mean, you're walking a balance because yeah, you are a professional and you teach at Pacifica, and so you have a kind of professional reputation and um all of that. So how to be natural and related and still professional, I don't know. I'm so unconcerned with professionality and I kind of rail against it. You know, my inner rebel comes out and just probably says things to defeat the ego's desire to come across as more refined and professional all the time. So I just allow it and go with it.
I think we need more of that. You know, when I've found myself, and I'm sure some of your other guests have as well, thinking about, well, this will be something great to put on my website, or this will be something to link to social media. And I think if we, maybe that's a place to start too with the role of the artist today, the challenges that makers and creators have is that in this modern Western world where social media is so prevalent and necessary to a certain degree, um, we can find ourselves preparing for that, thinking steps ahead of how something will show up on Instagram. What will this do when I, how many likes, how many potential followers, just all of those things. And I'm not a big user of social media. Um, but I see those pressures in my students and the private clients that I have. I see them in myself.
Hmm. Well, and before we started recording, we were talking about, I was commenting on the lovely background that you've prepared. Because we do think we're going to be on video, it's going to be recorded. So not only how do I appear, but what does my room that I'm in say about me? What does it communicate? And so we were talking about how you've been revising it recently, paring things down. And so that's even interesting because you've made some very intentional decisions on what to leave and what to take away.
Yes, I have, and I totally realized that it's curated, as all of our, Zoom backgrounds for those of us who spend a lot of time on Zoom are, if we take care. And for those of us who are creative individuals, that is something that's enjoyable. It reflects who we are. There's I'll give you a tour from my right to my left. Here we have Jung's black books in their beautiful boxed set. What you're not seeing is that they're all shoved back in there with lots of little sticky notes on them from my explorations, but they still fit back in there. And then something alive and beautiful here, these orchids. The piece behind me is a triptych, um, a collaged and assemblaged piece. I call it construction, a type of multifaceted multimedia piece involving drawing, um, collage, some added found elements. It's quite large. It's maybe about 9 feet long, 6 feet tall. There's silver leaf. There's two images that you may be picking up. The one up here
Hmm.
is like a skull with issuing out two streams. That's called Mikitzli in Mesoamerican mythology. And this here, these are the two streams. And the top is fire, the bottom is water. And you can kind of see that fiery, jagged part in the bottom water. And
Hmm.
that is called Atatlachinoli. Not the easiest thing to say, but it is so profound. When we think about um, philosophies of existence and depth psychological philosophies that involve a lot of polarities. This is, Jung, hundreds of years before Jung, of this union of opposites, the polarities that are always joined. One way that it is translated is as burning water, that beautiful paradox of burning water, always joined together. Very Heraclitan, too.
Hmm.
Um,
Love and strife. And
Love and strife, the tension, the cosmos works by harmony of tensions, like
mm.
the bow and the lyre, the yin and yang
Yeah,
of
you know,
self.
recently, I don't know if you know his work, but James Maffei, he's an American scholar of Aztec metaphysics and philosophy. And we're talking about this element of polarities and balancing and walking that fine line, like holding the tension of the opposites. And I was asking him, is there like a singular kind of image like the yin yang in the Aztec tradition? And he thought about it, and he thought of these masks that show both kind of life and death on the same face. Um, which, yeah, that's one polarity, but this is, I mean, this is kind of like that yin yang that I was searching for or wondering about. So that's beautiful. Thanks for bringing it in.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm not a person that has tattoos yet, but I've always, if
Never
I,
say never.
yeah, never say never. If I was going to have one, and maybe I will for a birthday coming up, that's what I would have.
Mm,
And just to finish out here with the background, lots of books, piles of books. There's plenty more that aren't even showing, and this wonderful skull, this articulating. Well, it's a skeleton, not
full
just the
skeleton,
skull.
yeah. Hmm.
The skeleton with the ability to articulate it, probably a medical model, but I think it's wonderful for as a reminder, particularly on like long Zoom meetings, not this sort of meeting, but like work sort of academic faculties sort of meetings. Don't tell, of course, but it's good to have a reminder of, okay, this is uh, this is what is important.
Yeah, I've got skulls all over my body too, but I always got a skull close by that when I'm doing client calls or Zoom calls, I can just glance over and go, okay, this is
Yeah.
where it ends.
Mhm.
Or where
Yeah,
where
you
this
just there's nothing like that for a good check-in of what matters.
Yeah. I'm curious why the black books and not the red book. You would think, the red book being Jung's kind of magnum opus is, full of his art and images. So why the black books, which are so text heavy, rather than the red book?
A space. It's just a curatorial decision. The Red Book, oh, absolutely, is in another room. Hillman's beautifully blue spined volumes of his uniform edition is in the other room. So
Hmm.
these are something to, I think, pare back a little bit rather than bringing it all in this one space.
I'm wondering if you have a Mesoamerican background in your lineage.
I probably do, although I can't trace back much further than my grandparents. I am a Latina. My mother is Mexican, born in Mexico. My father was American, died when I was only 7. So my mom was not a citizen at that time. We were living in a small town in Arizona where I grew up. And she stayed there with my sister and myself and worked toward becoming a US citizen so that we could have opportunities that she didn't have. So she was born on a farm somewhere in the state of Sonora in Mexico when there weren't, like birth certificates. Um, so it was, you were born at home, and she was one of 7. I think there are 3 of them still alive now, including my mom. So, yes, at some place in time, my ancestry includes, I'm sure, the colonizers and the Spanish
Mhm.
conquistadors, as well as the indigenous peoples of Mexico.
Hmm. Yeah, I was thinking about like what you've chosen for the background, and yeah, so they're the Mesoamerican elements. Jung is there. There's a tree, and I was thinking about James Hillman's notion that we should all try to discover whose tree we're on, like who's like our spiritual ancestors.
Yeah, I believe he called that our philosophical family tree. And of
Right.
course, they don't have to be philosophers. Um, but that is an exercise I actually do with my students, and they love it,
Hmm.
is to, who are your creative ancestors? And let's make I still call it a philosophical family tree. And the results are amazing. They can use collage. You don't have to be a highly trained artist to do that. You can pull images from the internet. um, who whose influence um, do you carry that you rarely think about, or who do you think about a lot? Who's close to the roots of that tree?
Hmm.
Hillman had Heraclitus and Plato and Plotinus, and then the Neoplatonists, and moving up um, to, of course, Jung and um, those closer to our time. But it's an incredible exercise to for one to do.
Yeah, it's something I have some of my clients do as well, like especially the creative types or people who are exploring depth psychology. One of the ways I think it's helpful is that it helps you narrow in your focus of study um, to those people who really resonate with you. Like when you read their words, there's that feeling that you're reading something true or that someone's put to words something that you've only felt in a kind of pre-verbal way. That's how I kind of help people pick out who's on their tree. And then so it narrows your focus on those writers who really speak to your soul. But then it also, yeah, leads you down to the roots. Because if you get into Hillman, well, you're going to get into Jung. If you get into Jung, you're maybe going to get into alchemy and maybe Nietzsche or Goethe or, some of the people who are in Jung's roots, and you're going to go through the Bible and a whole course of study in that. And it's like, um, it's like, what's the word I'm searching for? Like a, a kind of an education. It's a curriculum in a way.
It is. And it can be lifelong. Um, and
Oh
it
yeah,
can
especially with these folks.
folks, yes. It's like the Heraclitean soul. There is no end. As far as we can explore and discover, we never reach the end. And that is, I think, something also amazing and enlivening.
Hmm. Yeah, it keeps you going.
It does. And I think that's what it
Curiosity keeps you going, right?
is. Yeah, especially thinking of all the elders that are still active in depth psychological circles,
Hmm.
teaching or doing workshops or traveling. And I'm thinking like people like Dennis Patrick Slattery and Christine Downing and some of those just iconic teachers that were my teachers. I feel that I was so lucky to have had exposure to them, to have um, had them convey their wisdom and insights and be part of that. It's a lineage.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I was going to ask you a little bit about your background. Like, I'm always curious for people who are, like people in my tree or on your tree too. There's a lot of kind of overlap there. So I'm always curious, like, how did you get into Jung and Hillman and depth psychology?
I think through a fairly common route, a kind of my gateway drug, if I could put it in that term, is Campbell, Joseph Campbell.
Uh-huh. Hmm.
Looking for inspiration for my work. Going through bookstores when there were a lot of bookstores around back in the day, where you could go into a Barnes and Nobles or somewhere and just go to mythology section. Something would catch your eye. I remember pulling out a book of his, think it was called Mythic Images, because the images just spoke to me, particularly the Mesoamerican images. And I think that was my the entry down that rabbit hole of Campbell. And you can't get too far with Campbell before encountering Jung and
Hmm.
Nietzsche. And before you knew it, I was collecting my own little library. I was solo doing my own curriculum of study of those thinkers and others that were intersecting, and the circles kept growing and growing. Um, And my main preoccupation at that time, I'm talking in my 30s and 40s, um, was my own personal fine art, very devoted to that at that time. So this was feeding my visual art and my soul. Um, and it was not until my early 50s that I felt a real urge to combine to devote myself to also the scholarly aspect of who I am. I had always loved learning. I did very well in school throughout my youth, but there was a long gap of time where my learning was self-directed. And I came to a point where I didn't feel I could go any further or to the places I wanted to go without guides, without working with mentors, without having peers, a group of other seekers and people whose family trees were similar. I didn't know them in my, well, I knew some, yes, I shouldn't say that. But yeah, I wanted to be part of a lineage, a tradition, to enter into something that felt like a mystery school. Um,
Hmm. So, did you go to Pacifica to pursue that? Like, did you already
I
have a BA
did.
in fine art or something and then go to Pacifica late in life?
That is what happened. Yes, I had a BFA back in the last millennium. I won't tell you exactly when. Um, and then at 50, at 50, I decided to start graduate school and began working on an MA in mythological studies at Pacifica. At that time, which was about 15 years ago, the school did not have the program that I now chair, which is a program devoted to the creative individual. It's a 2 years,
Mm.
2-year master's program. So I found the closest resonance with the mythological studies program, which is still alive and doing beautiful work. It's a wonderful program, very much aligned with what I do in my program. And that is where I began another chapter of my life.
Yeah, well, so after the MA, I mean, you've got your PhD, so you also did that at Pacifica.
I did. Yeah, I continued there. I couldn't think of another place where I wanted to.
I know. It's the only
Yeah,
place. If I was
it's
going to go
still,
anywhere to
yeah,
post-secondary education, it would have to be Pacifica. They're the only people that get me.
it is still that place. Um, so I did follow through with a PhD, and then as synchronicity and luck and a little bit of self-assertion would happen, this combination of all three, I got to know Dr. Susan Rowland, who I know has been one of your guests in the
Hmm.
past,
Yeah.
and sent her a CV, met her, told her about myself, that I was curious about her program, which is the one I chair now. And she offered me a co-teaching position with her a year in the future. So, time moved on. That opportunity came around. That was 2017. I began co-teaching with her, and we were instantly very compatible collaborators. And I count her as one of my chief mentors. She has been a tremendous guide for me in so many ways. Um, so we chaired the program together for a few years. And now that Susan is so busy with her mystery writing, I
Mm.
mean, she's cranking out those murders left and right. It's incredible that she can now turn more of her attention to her creative callings. I've taken on more of the program chair roles and have been the sole chair for about 2.5 years now, where Susan still teaches in the program. She also teaches in our Jungian and Archetypal Studies program. So yeah, that's kind of the story to where I'm at right now with guiding this program, getting to teach such amazing people from diverse backgrounds, genders, ages, different countries, um, and also balancing that with my own urges and needs and desires and dissatisfactions around my own making.
Mm. Mm. I think it's really great that you're so well established as an artist first. It's not like maybe somebody who became a Jungian analyst and started doing collage as a kind of imaginal exercise or something like that. But the art was first, and also really inspiring to me that you really went on a new journey in the second half of your life. So I'm turning 50 this year, and I don't have a BA, so I can't get into Pacifica unless they pull some strings or something. But I had this fantasy of going there and finding, like, immersing myself in a community where people are speaking the same language and have the same interests. That is just, it's one of the things I long for in myself. So I can totally understand making a move like that.
Yes, and I think at its very best, it is just that. There are moments and parts of days when our students are on campus that just feel absolutely transcendent, magical, as if we were walking around the groves of, ancient Greece and
Hmm.
talking about the most important ideas that affect human life and the cosmos. Um, but there's an interesting story of getting a BA, someone wanting that. Um, to get into Pacifica so badly. Last year at our commencement, our guest speaker was a woman who had recently been elected as a California Supreme Court justice, who had received her PhD at Pacifica. And one of the stories she told from the lectern to the assembled soon-to-be graduates and their guests was how she didn't have a BA. She was a very busy attorney, and she went to night school and studied on the weekends. And
Mhm.
I think she must have started in her 40s or 50s, because I think she's comparable in age to myself, mid 60s now. But that was really inspiring to see her devotion to getting over that bar that is the gate to get
Mm.
into graduate study.
Yeah, I mean, I've come this close to entering into an undergrad course of study. Of course, I think, well, I would go and be like a psych major or something. And then I look at those first year courses that are required in a psych major degree, and I go, oh, there's no way. As soon as I'd encountered like a stats class or something, that would be the end of me. So my new thinking is if I ever do it, I would have to go through music or something like that. Like I'd have to go finally get my music degree that I dropped out of when I was 19, finish that up, and then that would be my way to get into a place like
Yes,
Pacifica.
that would be it. That would be perfect. And I would lobby for you to come join my program, and would be amazing.
Well, I got to tell you, so I'm doing the math in my head, and you're like around 65. And I mean, you're very youthful looking. Um, and what's your secret? Is it just genetics? Is it those Latin genes? Or is there something about the creative life?
Um, hmm. Sunscreen, I would say, truly. No,
Yeah.
sunscreen in your 20s will make your skin look great in your 60s. So it's never too late to start, for not just for women, people of all genders. Definitely that is big. Occasional, red wine here and there, some dancing, creative work, scholarly pursuits, all of that, yeah, comes together, I think.
Mm. Yeah, I think all of that would just lend itself to an inner glow that would maybe help to soften any signs of aging.
Yeah, I think we're on
Like a
track here.
spark of life, you know?
Yeah, we have a new business venture here. We're sort of pondering. This is how it starts, and by a year from now, we'll be marketing some like alchemical potion. We'll have beautiful bottles, and we'll be selling that.
Yeah. The creative life as a solution to aging, or I mean, there's something to it,
Well,
but that shouldn't be the only reason.
there's absolutely something to it. That's why there's so many elders, creative
Mhm.
elders that don't retire. That it's not a word that they relate to. They're
Yeah.
just so devoted and so enlivened by their work that they keep doing it.
Yeah. I mean, if anything, just retiring from the day job so you could fully devote yourself to the creative work at that stage in your life where you have less responsibilities and things, right?
Yes, that's a wonderful threshold, because a lot of those pressures of the outside world kind of fall away. And I've read some interesting interviews with quote unquote elder artists, senior artists, who have found that to be this third or fourth act of their life. Um, just so enriching. They're not ready to step into the shadows. They're not out, golfing or at the casinos, or not that there's anything bad with, everything in its place, but they are fully engaged with their calling, and many of them to have the time and energy to share what they know with others. They're volunteering at schools. They are hosting workshops. They're doing things in quiet ways that may never be known, but that are making a big difference.
Yeah, that's really interesting. This overlap of the role of the elder and the artist. I pulled this quote from your book, which I didn't mention yet, but you've written this really wonderful book, The Archetypal Artist, Reimagining Creativity and the Call to Create. And I was struck, seeing the background behind you now and that big piece. Uh, you talk about how this book is a kind of bricolage. And so oh, of course, she's going to put together a book in the same way that she puts together her art, is taking these pieces and assembling them like an assemblage. So I pulled this quote, and I think it relates to what you're talking about in terms of the role of the artist, but also the role of the elder. You write, the opus of the artist, witch, magician, and alchemist, is not directed toward a personal goal, nor is it an attempt to transcend the world. Instead, it is aimed at fostering a mutual relationship of creativity in and with the soul as the crossroads of multiple realities, both seen and unseen. So there's something in that about this last stage of life, being close to death, being closer to the unseen world, maybe having less outer responsibilities, focusing more on the inner life and the spiritual life and preparing for death. Um, so it seems like the perfect time to flourish as an artist is in that second half of life and beyond.
Yeah, I think that the idea of the closeness to death is also something that I'm now making connections to Hillman's ideas of the nature of the soul, that it has a close relationship with death, that it is very much connected to love as well, to Eros. But it's a time, I think, if we can make it to that time, and not everyone can, not everyone can set the majority of their worldly responsibilities aside. But if you can, even for moments, even for certain parts of days or weeks, um, you can open yourself up in ways that just aren't possible with a little chunk of time here, a little chunk of time there, with the responsibilities of life. Um, and that should be where we're at as human beings as we get into that elder phase, um, doing a lot of reflection, but not so much self-reflection that it's solipsism. It's preparing
Mm.
preparing for whatever might be next, and offering the gifts we have to the next generations.
Mm. Yeah, you also talk about the thread that connects the shamanic archetype with the artist. One of those things being a call to service. Um, it's what unites image makers and storytellers. And so again, it contradicts maybe the kind of Anglo-North American idea of elder as, okay, now it's time for me to retreat from the world and any sense of responsibility and just focus on myself and have the golden years of acting like a teenager again and getting to do all those things that I had to put aside for so many years while I raised a family and sacrificed myself to work and all that kind of thing. But it's like this new call into service as as um well something. I mean, what is the service that we can offer as we become less kind of culturally relevant in in this particular culture. What can the elder person, the elder artist, or the artist in general offer our society or culture?
You know who I'm thinking of when you're asking that question is Michael Mead,
Hmm.
someone that you may have interviewed in the past, who does so much work with um, elderhood in that transition, as does James Hollis, the
Hmm.
very well-known, well-read, meaning his books are very popular and well-read, Jungian analyst. Um, I think that offering may sound sort of common sense or cliche, but it's the wisdom that has been accrued, the discernment um, to say, this matters, this doesn't matter. Don't, if you were giving advice to someone younger, like don't waste your time on so much of that. That's not going to matter when you get to be my age, if you do. Um, to stay true, to find ways to continually, or as often as possible, have a touchstone, a way of returning to yourself, a renewal process, so that you don't get swept away in a superficial life of um, making and spending.
Mhm. Or yeah, just consuming and spending, not
Consuming
even
and
making,
spending, yeah,
maybe
making, yeah, not
making
so much
money, making money
making
to
money.
consume and then yeah, yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
that's the making I was referring
Yeah.
to. That
Yeah, and
it,
that's a kind of encouragement to stick with what matters. And I think then the elder who is continually renewed and revivified by their creative life, their soulful life, becomes a model for maybe a different way to age. I mean, I can look at people who I consider mentors and elders, and one of the things that always strikes me is um, their ability to balance both the senex and the puer qualities late in
mhm,
life.
mhm.
So there's a youthful spirit that's very much alive and, like I was saying, kind of radiates through the aging body in a way that helps them still appear youthful and gives them an energy to keep doing the work, whatever that is. But it's grounded in the senex quality of like understanding limitations, reckoning with death, having some sort of discipline and consistency. That kind of thing is really common in the kind of people that I look to as role models.
Yes, I couldn't agree more for that sort of effervescence in a person that is also equally capable of gravitas at the same time. There's this playfulness of the two qualities.
Mm. Hmm. I mean, Susan Rowland seemed to have that to me as well. She, I could see how she could be an intimidating person because of her intellect and her kind of strength of character. But there is a sense of humor underlying it and a kind of effervescence that comes out at times. And so you get both, which I just find like kind of surprising and refreshing when you get to experience it and see the shifts. Like this is not a one-sided person, you know?
Yeah, not at all. She's a great example. And I'm actually her elder, by the way. Um,
Really?
yeah, Susan's a couple of years younger than I am. Um, but I was just telling a new student who's studying with her for the first time this spring that the student should be prepared to have a lot of fun. That not only is
Mhm.
Susan a um, world-renowned Jungian scholar, but she's a whole lot of fun. She can be just wickedly funny.
Um, let's talk a little bit about this shamanic archetype or shamanic personality that runs through your book. You know, it's something I'm certainly interested in and is very central to me. I'm actually giving an experiential workshop on the weekend based around the shamanic personality or shamanic archetype. Uh, I mean, what about that captures your imagination? When did you become interested in shamanism or the shamanic archetype? Um, yeah, just to maybe start there, like, what's your interest in that? How did it come about?
Yeah, well, first I want to point out that I'm liking how you're framing it as a shamanic personality or an archetype. I like to use terms like shamanic sensibility shamanic
Mm.
spirit, so that I'm wanting to parallel um, this archetypal life way with the life way, the archetypal patterning of the artist and creator. And there are many, many parallels. I think I started to pick up on those in my early readings with Campbell, who will lead you eventually or sooner than later to Eliade and his very influential work on shamans and shamanism. But one thing that I want to do in this book, or wanted to do, and I'm not sure that I did it well enough, but I try to when I speak about it, is to make a real clear delineation between the archetypal patterning of the shamanic and the shaman per se, the
Mm.
actual medicine person who lives and works today in many places. Um, so I don't want to appropriate. I don't want to go so far as to say artist equals shaman, or
Mm.
that one should. It's easy to be inflated, to get into an inflation, to also appropriate.
Mm.
Um, but with those guardrails and cautions in mind, I want to honor the the calling of the medicine person, whether they call themselves shamans or other things, um,
Mm.
and the the calling and the patterning of the maker creator. And of course, there can be people who transcend both, who are a type of healer that is
Healer
more
slash
attuned,
artist.
yeah, to the
Yeah.
shaman, and is also living and working, creating in a way that would be recognized as an artist. But I
Oh, yeah.
think the distinction is very important.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, even the word shaman to describe anyone who's indigenous or mestizo, who is working in healing. I mean, it's an anthropological term. It's whatever. It's a European appropriation of a
Yes.
Siberian, language group, all of that stuff. We need to talk about it, and so we need language. And so I like the distinction that you're drawing, that the word shaman describes someone is playing a functional role in a society or community, but there is something else that we can describe as or note as the shamanic archetype. Um,
Yes.
I'd love to hear like how what you think that the shamanic personality or sensibility, as you put it. What does that describe? Like, can you kind of help us feel into the qualities of the archetype?
Yes. Um, that describes a person who has either submitted themselves or who have found themselves in a kind of initiatory process, either seeking that out or perhaps it by chance um, occurs to that person. It can happen through illness, it can happen through a significant loss, it can happen through, I love the phrase, a creative illness that you may have come
Mm.
across in my book. And I take that from Henri Ellenberger, who wrote a very definitive study on the origins of what we now call depth psychology. And he drew some very interesting parallels between the literal shaman, if we want to continue using that word, the traditional healer, and um, and the analyst and the therapist. And along with that, one can find the same parallels to the artist and maker. Again, that sort of submission to an initiation into um, a a way of life that includes where service to the soul is foremost, where some, either through training or through a revelatory experience, or maybe a combination of both, the person has discovered the ability to move through realities from this common reality that we in the West think is the only reality to traverse worlds.
Mm.
Um, that's rather fundamental, and whether that's happening as an ecstatic sort of journey that we think about with the shaman healer, or as being a co-creator with the creative spirit. Many artists will describe their creative process in such a way from this, and it seems to be on a spectrum from maybe a very equal partnership in this dance with the creative, something else that is wanting to create with you, through you, to the other side of the spectrum is something that's more like a possession, where you are the servant, the vessel, the medium, the channel. You are taken over, similar to the very old Platonic idea of theomania, divine mania, of having the gods, the outside creative forces working through you when you are their servant. So those are some of the parallels as well of being in communication with forces that in our regular daytime world, most people do not come in contact with. And you have the training, the ability, the courage to encounter those forces, both benevolent and malevolent. And your purpose is one of service to the collective.
Mm. Um, I had this little like red flag go up when you were talking about that correlation between the therapist and the shaman. Uh, just because it seems like such a danger zone for grandiose inflation. Um, what do you think it is that's so attractive about the shamanic archetype that can lead people to become, over-identified with it, inflated? Is it like a kind of romantic vision of the healer, the magician? Is it the power combination of both? Anything else?
It's absolutely the romanticism, the exoticism, the power trip, the ego inflation that can make that connection dangerous. But I think at the heart of it, the therapeutes, the original Greek term was a servant at the temple, a servant of the soul. The in its best sense, and we know that Hillman found plenty um, to argue with about psychology, psychotherapy, analysis. In its best sense, it is serving the soul, but the soul has pretty much been drained out of, especially mainstream therapies. They don't speak much about the soul, but it's this service to soul, to the lost soul, to the hurting soul, uh, to the world soul, that I think is the connecting thread if it is held with humility um, and um, and that we don't take on trappings that actually do the opposite of serving soul.
Hmm. I'm trying to remember his name. He was an indigenous wise man from the U.S. I think it was Frank Old Crow, but he had a concept. Well, for him, it wasn't a concept, but it was how he saw his role. Where the Westerner might think of him as a medicine man or shaman. He said, my role is to be a hollow bone for spirit to move through.
Mm-hmm.
And and I really like that because it requires like an emptying out of one's self, one's own intentions, agendas, all of that stuff. And there's also the element of like a hollow bone was the first musical instrument that we found. You know, it's these hollow bones with little holes pierced in them to be the first flute. So I think about that as like the spirit moving through you as an instrument for something beautiful. And oh yeah, I'm gonna identify with that. It seems like that's the kind of attitude I want to bring to any kind of work I do in the imaginal or healing world.
Yes, and I want to bring that same sensibility. I mean, it can be so inspiring without being inflating. I mean, it's stirring, it's soul stirring just to hear you say that. It's thrilling. And there are a few places in the book that I caution against flying off with that into a giant inflation. Um, because it comes, on one hand, it is all of those things. Um, but on the other hand, it comes with tremendous responsibility.
Mm.
It's a devotion to a way of being that is continually working on diminishing the ego. There's a person that I spend a few pages on in the book, a little known Jungian analyst from the 20th century and writer and theorist, Rosemary Gordon, who
Mm.
was part of that sort of second generation of Jungians. And here's one of those chance things that someone loosely associated with Pacifica, in a passing conversation when I was telling them about my interests, said, "Oh, you should really look at her book, Rosemary Gordon's book, Dying and Creating."
Mm.
And that title just stayed with me. I don't know if I wrote it down or I just remembered it. I tracked down that book at some point, and that is a wonderful window, into what we're talking about here, the correlations between the creative person suffering ego deaths, much like the healer, um,
Mhm.
being willing to submit oneself to that, which, especially in our Western culture now, is abhorrent. We're such a culture that is focused on control that the idea of surrender seems frightening. It is frightening, but it seems like something that should not even be attempted.
Mm. In order to fully surrender, you have to trust uh, nature, the world, spirit. You have to trust something other than yourself. Like, Jung's amazing question. What supports you when you no longer support yourself? Like, what a question to wrestle with for a modern person. Is there anything that you can count on beyond yourself?
Well,
And so,
circling
I
back,
mean, you have to be in contact with that in order to give yourself over to it, right?
yes, you have to at least believe it exists and not be stuck in rationality, not be stuck in ideas about reality, about human willpower.
Upholding the ego or the persona. You can't be too caught up in that either, because you got to be willing to be humiliated or. Like I like that word humiliated. I mean, it's got earth in it, it's got hummus in it, and yeah.
It does. You need to
But
be
what a
willing.
radical idea. Like to be humiliated in our culture is like one of the worst things.
It's the worst thing. It is the worst thing to be humiliated. Um, and this, we're still talking about these parallel processes, these life
Mm,
waves, these archetypal patterns. It's not only humiliation, it's dismemberment. Um, when you start talking alchemy as well, you have these,
dissolving.
yes, dissolving all of the operations, breaking down into going into the nigredo, which could be a correlate to this creative illness, which could be months or
Mm.
years in that um, soupy mess before something starts to congeal again. coagulate again. And most people will not endure that, not for long. But
Mm.
I think the shaman, another word that I've come across is the intercessor, which I like.
Mm.
Which, Patsy Hawkwing is a Lakota healer who wrote a beautiful chapter in a book called The Parallels Between Analytical Psychology and Shamanism, a book that's maybe 20 years old or so now. Mostly the essays are by analysts. I think she's the only essay in there, the only essay of an Indigenous person who is a healer in the model we would call a shaman, but she calls herself an intercessor.
Mm. So, intercessor meaning one who, like a hermetic character, one who helps communication between the spirits and the person, or the gods and the person, that kind of thing.
Yeah, the psychopomp um,
Hmm.
associated with Hermes, that is another model that transcends both the traditional healing path and the path of the artist creator. You are a guide of souls. You're moving between realities. You are coming back with something. And this gets into a little bit of the Campbellian, hero's journey, returning with a boon. But if you take the heroic out
Hmm.
uh, and put the humility in, I think that's what we're talking about.
Hmm. Yeah, certainly there'd be the element of the descent, the need to be mentored into that role or that capacity, but returning, unlike the kind of heroic archetype, not returning just with some piece of your own soul or something for yourself or your own gifts to bring to the world, but helping to bring, I don't know. See, here we get it's kind of tricky for me because there is an idea in kind of neo-shamanic circles that we as shamanic practitioners can do soul retrievals for other people and kind of take on that role of the shaman healer. I'm not very comfortable with that. I think
Nor am
you know,
I.
when I do the kind of soul journeying with people, my role is to facilitate people going on their own descent to discover what parts of them need to be retrieved, recovered, tended to, um, accepted, loved. Uh, I don't want the responsibility of trying to diagnose for someone where their soul loss is. I really believe that people are able to do that themselves. And so for me, that's part of like awakening up the shamanic sensibility within ourselves.
Yes, I think those cautions are very important, um, to not take that on, but to guide in ways that are appropriate for us as contemporary Western people who did not grow up, who were not embedded in a kind of cosmos where these multiple realities, the idea of a soul retrieval was thought possible, where you had elders that could train you.
Mm.
So that's another place of real caution. But I think something that the creative person can do as we're continuing down these parallel tracks, through their work, they can reveal what they've discovered in the thing that they make. Um, they can share an experience in a kind of reality, um, an experience of perhaps what is coming, a kind of prophetic experience with um, with their communities. So it's this, I've come back with something, I've had an experience. It wasn't just for me. I'm going to make and shape something, a song, a dance, a novel, a film that will allow you to participate in that. And it just may transform you. It may give you something, the medicine we can use that word, and artists also use that word, not just healers, the medicine that you're looking for, or it can shift you in a way that you begin to shift the world around you. So this enhanced consciousness is a magic ability, an ability of artists to enhance consciousness and to enhance compassion.
Hmm. That's interesting. Enhance consciousness. One of the definitions of magic that you come across is someone who's able to transform or manipulate consciousness. In the old days, they would say manipulate reality, but someone like Dion Fortune kind of revised that for moderns. It's like, well, you have the ability to transform your consciousness. Um, that seems to come from an egoic place. Like, who's the one in me that knows how my consciousness needs to be transformed? Um, I don't know, but I do like the idea of enhancing consciousness in terms of becoming more aware of the different parts of oneself, becoming more aware or interested in the world as a community of beings. I mean, there's so many uh, people out there, not merely human people. Um, and there's something about that that enhances your life. Yeah, but so I like that, enhancing consciousness.
Enhancing, and I don't think it's an ego-driven thing in the way that excuse me, trying to get across.
Mhm.
Um,
No, I was referring to the idea of changing my consciousness,
yeah, yeah,
right?
not that. It's more akin to Jung's idea of bringing um, bringing things to light, bringing more of the unconscious. If and that's a whole nother term.
Can I just revise that? Bringing light to things,
Yeah, bringing light to things, or bringing. It doesn't even have to be light. We don't have to use that.
right?
Um,
Awareness.
Bringing our attention to
Hmm.
things. So we are enhanced. We are enlarged. We are made more complex, more caring, more prone to notice things that we don't notice now.
Hmm. And if we start noticing things that we don't notice now, like the world out there, um, we're going to see that it has value, and then maybe we'll think it's worth preserving or tending to and caring for. And so this comes to another quote that I really love, and this is from Susan Rowland, and this speaks to something I think about a lot in terms of how does my modern mind coexist with what I think of as my mythic mind or you know, um, my ancestral mind, the mind that knows dreams are real, that sees synchronicities everywhere, that sees that tree as an alive, sentient being. Um, you know, how do they coexist? And so I think of them like being bridged in a way. So I shift from one kind of form of consciousness to another, depending on the situation. Um, I don't know if eventually, those sides of ourselves will meld. I think it's really important for people to reclaim the mythic or ancestral mind, which I think is related to art and this shamanic archetype. Um, but I like how Susan put it here. And so you kind of you paraphrase her in a way. So this is your quote, but referring to something that she talks about. Um, this is from your book. A renewal of which consciousness, WITCH, a renewal of which consciousness with its respect for multiple realities, including the sacred and the sciences, mythos and logos, is a necessity for the 21st century. And it seems that that's what you're talking about here is we need to reawaken that capacity in order to avoid, uh, you know, human extinction, extinction of the planet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, precisely. And another way of describing what you just read there is the idea of transdisciplinarity, which may have come up in your conversation with Susan.
Yeah,
It's a key part of her work, and something I see her infusing in the many arenas where she works, and that is just this radical de centering of what we think of as the current hierarchy of ways of knowing, of making knowledge, and of allowing all those things that we have pushed aside for centuries, um, that have been grouped under this umbrella that we might call the feminine. Things like the occult, the sacred, the non-rational, the animal world, um, the
intuition.
intuition,
Hmm.
imagination, everything that we have pushed aside in modernity, um, is exactly what we need right now to turn back to. Um, because as we've seen, rational arguments aren't enough to convince our communities, our friends, neighbors, um, of the real dangers, the perils that we're facing. Um,
That's right. Yeah, because scientists have been talking since at least the 1950s about the imminent, collapse of the oil industry or the heating of the planet. When I was growing up in the 80s, it was like greenhouse gases and aerosol cans and the hole in the ozone. So people have been kind of sounding that alarm for a long time from a rational perspective. If we continue to do this, this is inevitable. Um, but it hasn't been enough, obviously, to create major change. So, yeah, I think you're right. Something else needs to be
Not
awakened.
enough. There's a quote near the end of the book from Lawrence Ferlinghetti, the
Hmm.
late poet and publisher, City
City
Light,
Lights
yeah, City
bookstore,
Light,
yeah.
who just died within the last couple of years, who said something like that the purpose of art is transformation of the world. Anything less
Hmm.
than that is unacceptable.
Hmm.
And that's a provocative statement. I mean, that's a sobering and inspiring statement
Mhm.
for anyone who makes things for an artist to think about, that you actually have powers. That is another key theme, a thread that I hope comes through this book, to ennoble creators, makers, artists to view themselves as people possessing vital powers for our world now. Um,
Hmm. I need a little break. We've come to that time. Can we take a little pause and be right back?
yeah,
All right.
okay. I want to read you something that relates to what I just mentioned from Ferlinghetti. And this is from philosopher and mystic, as some might say, Terence McKenna, written um, before he passed. And this is what he had to say about the artist's role. The apocalypse is not something which is coming. The apocalypse has arrived in major portions of the planet, and it's only because we live within a bubble of incredible privilege and social insulation that we still have the luxury of anticipating the apocalypse. The artist's task is to save the soul of mankind, and anything less is a dithering while Rome burns. If artists cannot find the way, then the way cannot be found.
That's pretty good. I mean, that guy had a way with words.
He did. So that again is
Yeah.
something.
It's a call to create, to I don't know, a call to arms but the arms are the pen and the brush, you know.
Yes.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's a call to realize our powers, step into those powers um, because they are needed desperately. And we as creative people need to expand our thinking about what an artist is beyond what the marketplace tells us in the West.
Right. Yeah, I was talking to one of my clients last week, and he's uh done collage. He works in theater. He builds sets for operas and things like that. And we are talking about this collage piece that he's been kind of working on, not working on for a while. It's, been in his little art space in the hallway, and he passes by it. And in our call, he's telling me about what's been taking up his time, beyond work, is like playing with his daughter. And we talked about how he plays with his daughter, and, putting like a long sleeve shirt on the top of his head and being like Octopus Daddy, and um how she like gets scared and really excited when he does different voices and takes on these different personas. And I said, well, that's your creativity. It's so there's no creative block here, but that's where your creativity is being channeled. And like, let's just take a moment to value that your creativity is being expressed through this play with your young daughter. And so the collage will be sitting there in the hallway, and it's there whenever you want to get to it, but we don't have a creative block here.
Yeah, yeah. And there's also something, as you're saying that, I'm thinking of the beloved and late poet Mary Oliver, who I
Mm,
quote a few times in the book, um, talking about her way of working um, with a busy life. No, she didn't have children, but she worked sometimes a couple of different jobs to support herself before she was became known as a poet. And she would get up at 4:30 or 5 in the morning and give what she called her self, her best energy, her number one person to that work in the morning for a couple of hours. And then she would give her B self to her employer for the rest of the day. So there's it comes back to a devotion to oneself and one's calling, which also comes with a sense of, as Hillman said, also just helplessness, maybe overwhelm, like it's too much. Um, but I think for all of us, whether we have kids or jobs or both, or other responsibilities, elder care for a lot of us, um, there has to be a regular um, devotional time where you can give some of your very best to that um, thing that wants to be made through you.
mm. Yeah, you got to feed your soul, or your soul is going to starve. And your soul starts starving. You lose vitality, you lose inspiration, you lose a vision of the future of how it could all be and how it could be different. And yeah, so you got to find time in your day to feed your soul. It just occurred to me that the word self-care gets bandied about a lot in social media circles and wellness communities and that kind of thing. And I thought, well, self-care, so much emphasis on that. What about soul care? I thought, well, that's what Thomas More was talking about. It's
Yes.
just he never, self-care wasn't such a thing back then, or else he might have called his book Soul Care instead of Care of the Soul, which doesn't quite have the same ring to it. But maybe we could do an updated edition and call it like Soul Care for the 21st century. Um, anyway, a little digression from me,
Yes.
but
But I think the fact that his book was caught on the way it did and was such a sensation was not only that he is an expert translator of Hillman, he gets Hillman
mm,
into real language, regular language that people can really access, um, but that he had his finger on the pulse of something. And
mm.
I come back to that book a lot. I pull chapters out for different workshops and um, yeah.
Yeah, I know it's such a perennial classic. And yeah, I think obviously, with the success he had with that book. Being invited onto Oprah by Oprah herself shows that the culture was really hungry for talk of soul, for bringing soul back. Um, and then Hillman, of course, in his book, The Soul's Code, kind of picked up on that, and that was his most successful book. And you talk about Hillman quite a bit. He's obviously one of these significant people on both of our trees. Um, and so uh, this is leading to a question for you, but it's related to the acorn theory. And if people don't already know the acorn theory, could you like sum it up in a nutshell, so to speak?
Yes, boom, boom, boom. Yes. Uh, Hillman's acorn theory posits that there is a third way between nature and nurture that that assists in the unfolding of a human life. Of course, we know nature, all those things like genetics and factors that we can't control that come together to make us. And nurture are those factors, including our socioeconomic status, where we grow up, our geography, who we grow up around, what forces, both benevolent and malevolent, shape our worlds. But he had a radical notion that was old. He brought this back from at least Plato's time, that there was something else. There was an inner image, and he used interchangeably the words very much on purpose: image, angel, daimon, soul, and acorn. And acorn is perhaps the easiest one for us to envision, because in every acorn is the oak, the telos of that. What it could be is already there. It doesn't so much decide what it's going to be. Um, that trajectory, the outlines, the major outlines are there. So in those biographies that he brought in, which are mostly all creative people, like Bergman and Josephine Baker and so many others.
Mm.
Uh, we
James
see
Baldwin. Yeah,
James
the James
Baldwin.
Baldwin one was a great story too. Yeah.
That's a great story of seeing that teacher that saw
Mhm.
in him. Um, Not all of us have had teachers like that. It's so lucky to have something like that. But that image wants to be, um, that soul wants to have certain adventures in this life, has a plan. It's not a fated plan. That's one of the very important themes in that book, that he's not talking about predetermination. Um, he's just talking about a certain leanings, certain desires that the soul has, the acorn has. One thing that I would compliment if people are reading The Soul's Code or have read it a long time ago is to read the chapter in We've had 100 years of psychotherapy and the world is getting worse with Hillman and Ventura. Read the chapter called Life Lived Backwards.
Mhm.
That's another one that I pull out separately and use in conjunction with chapters of the Soul's Code, because it, in a nutshell, in one chapter, is the most beautiful way of describing that it is not our individuation that matters, in Hillman's opinion. It is the individuation of the soul, the image, the acorn.
Mm. Mhm. To realize that through how you live your life and the style in which you express yourself. I love his emphasis on personal style, actually. So not just, style of dress, but style of expressing. That's become, I mean, it's something that I really embraced because it allowed me to embrace my eccentricities and idiosyncrasies. The way I speak because of where I'm from and who I've listened to and, all that stuff. And um, I just love that. I love Hillman's emphasis on style, like personal style.
I do too. And I know we both have read Dick Russell's 3-volume biography on Hillman. And there's a
That's a
lot,
confession.
yeah, a lot of style in there. Hillman loved the aesthetic life. The via aesthetica is how he
Mm,
lived his life.
yeah. So, okay, thanks for the summation of the acorn theory. That was really nicely done. Now, like as Hillman said, life is more easier or more clearly read, uh, from
Backwards.
backwards,
Mhm.
right? Having lived it, looking back and go, oh, I can see where this led to that, and this was there in the beginning. And so, when was the artist and the acorn starting to express itself for you? Can you look back and see things? So, just just because I'm curious about your own journey, but also to help people be able to recognize it in themselves as well, how they can look back and see how things were emerging or struggling to emerge early on.
Yeah, I think that struggling to emerge is a real key. And you see Hillman focusing on those struggle points in those individual biographies that he uses in Soul's Code. I think if one looks back and sees things you really wanted in childhood or adolescence, things you yearned for, think
Hmm.
think back to your yearnings. Another wonderful Hillmanian phrase that I love is tell me what you yearn for and I'll tell you who you are.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
to make some time to really think about what did I yearn for? What did I long for? What didn't my parents value? Didn't allow me to explore? Um, what didn't I allow myself to explore? Um,
Hmm.
I also
Yeah, and like a little kid doesn't think I'm yearning for this, right? They don't have the
no, a
language
little
for
kid
that.
is
But, another
every
way to think
bit.
about it maybe is like looking back and looking at like what you fantasized about, right? Like when you're alone in your bedroom, what were you fantasizing about? That's showing you kind of what you yearn for in a way, right?
Yes, yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely.
And so what was it for you? That's why I was trying to get personal with you.
Oh,
And
well,
then
I
you
think
then you gave me the one Ken look.
Ken,
I said,
yes.
"Ooh, she's avoiding this." We don't have to go there if you don't want to share it.
Oh no, I think it's multiple, and it points to this Hillman's idea of multiplicity, which I also embrace, in that I always sort of went back and forth in my younger years between scholar and artist.
Mm,
Um, I have a Gemini sun, so I think that's probably kind of natural to be dual. The sort of rebus-like figure from alchemy, that's joined together, the hermaphroditic figure. But I'm, as I mentioned earlier, was always good at school. I never had struggles with that. I enjoyed the academics, was in the honor society and those sort of things in my early years of school, and but also was pulled toward the creative too. So I tend to oscillate back and forth. I was this sort of honor society, really good writer, thinking I was going to be a maybe a journalist or a professional writer, investigative reporter, or something, maybe out of high school. But then got into college and had my first visual art class, like basic drawing and drawing from life, nude life models, and um, just the tactile nature, the matter itself of the paper, and this is beautiful pencils and paints, and I just couldn't get enough of that. So that was another part of me saying that it needed attention. And I
mm,
think all through my life, the last 40 years have been an oscillation of coming together, sometimes in a really good union of those two, and other times one takes precedence and the other retreats.
mm. Uh, can I offer a little analysis here?
Please.
Well, I'm struck by this fantasy of when you're a child of thinking of yourself as a journalist or investigative reporter. Uh, what's central to that for me is like a curiosity, to investigate something that you're interested in, draws you in. captures your attention, you want to investigate it. Um, and when you talked about going through Joseph Campbell into mythology and all of that, I mean, that's an investigation, and it's got a kind of a particular direction or theme to it, which then is feeding your creative expression in the world. And so it seems like maybe the curiosity is what feeds the creativity, and not so much two-faced, but part of like a kind of Ouroboros cycle or something,
Mhm.
like which we see in the Mesoamerican art as well, right?
Yes, yes.
Um, so just to say that it seems integrated. It's not like shifting from one to the other, but one feeds the other, maybe.
It's feeling more that way, and that is one of my goals actually as I step into this next part of my elderhood is to make it much more explicit, to be very conscious about not favoring one for the other, is to
Hmm.
really bring them into harmony.
Hmm. And so you, aside from your um, teaching and writing, you also work as a creative mentor with people. And I mean, I find that just kind of interesting that you're not billing yourself as a psychotherapist, but a creative mentor. There's something in me that often comes up when I'm doing coaching and counseling work with people that, it's something I don't often express to people directly, but it's something I often am feeling. And, talking to my wife after and like talking about the kind of things that people get so stressed out about or embroiled in. And we go, God, it's like the antidote is creativity or art. Like if you put your focus on that, a lot of these other problems that you're bringing to therapy are going to be a non-issue, or they're going to be a part of a larger context, a creative, more generative context, which helps you kind of uh, endure the suffering because it now is infused with meaning, and there's a way to kind of work with it, work through it. Um, and so I kind of like that you've just not putting yourself out there working as a therapist, but working directly on creativity.
Yes, I'm not a therapist, not trained as a therapist, don't want to be a therapist. So I make that clear with the folks I work with, and many of those are also seeing a therapist or analyst or have done so. So my focus is we get right in there on their creative work um, and talk about uh, their own very foundational ideas about themselves as a creator. They've we have to value ourselves first as creative people, and that is oftentimes one of the major obstacles. You just don't. We have been sold on the idea that we have to be specialists, that the one thing we do has to be the thing that earns our living, and we have to be really good at it. That if we're doing our creative work on the side or at night, um, and it's not our day job, then it is somehow less than, that we are dilettantes or Sunday painters or hobbyists. That is a huge impediment that's a cultural roadblock to get over.
Mm,
Um, but I feel very strongly that when we are doing jobs in the world to support ourselves, support our families, we're acting as our own patrons. We are
mm,
buying
mhm.
ourselves time,
That's
uh,
great.
and we're buying ourselves the time we need to get up at 4:30 or 5 in the morning, or spend a weekend day devoting ourselves to that calling. And if we can avoid the pressures of diminishing ourselves because we're not making our living off our creativity. And so
Mm,
many creators don't. We mix various things. I mix things. It's not, there's nothing wrong with that.
mm. Um, so going back to what what you quoted from Mary Oliver, how she had this idea that she had to kind of like nurture her A personality before her B personality took over and went out and did the job. Uh, but I like that framing of the B personality, the one who has to go out and kind of have the job to pay the bills, pay the rent, and all that stuff, is the patron of the A
Yeah.
personality, who is actually more primary to who I really am. That the artist, the creative person with depth and soul. Uh, and yeah, you might have to put on the B personality costume and go out into the world and do that job, but secretly, I also like that. That could help you really kind of get through some hard days in the beige office, in the office tower, right? Is like just being this undercover artist who's just there to like make the bills so that the artist, the A personality, can live.
Yeah, and she used the phrasing that her A effort. So she wasn't yeah, so much separating the herself, which she did. There was part of that is separation, but she knew that for her, and it's not for every creator, it was early morning where she had the most energy, the most connection to what she called the miraculous. So she gave the A effort, all the like 80% of, maybe not 80%, but let's say 75% of what she was going to just pour out there to her poetry. And then she could go to the post office and work or go do tutoring and still hold up her end, do a very fine job, be dependable. But while she was there, she knew, and this is kind of getting to what you're saying, that she had secretly, spent 2 hours in the morning writing, just allowing these amazing poems to flood through her and getting them down on paper.
Hmm. So, when you're working with someone, I mean, this is so common that where people, uh, well, even the language I think is really limiting, and getting over the language and the assumptions around creativity is half the battle, maybe even more of it. So there's an idea that I can become creatively blocked. Uh, How do you talk about creative blocks? How do you understand them, and how do you help people to work through them, even if that's something that we want to do? But I just want to hear from you about around that topic.
Yeah, I turned to Hillman a lot and introduced some of his ideas on that to people who may not have ever heard them. It kind of shifts the fact that the psyche is inherently creative. We're the ones that are sort of sleepwalking through our days. Psyche's creating, imagining all the time. Life is inherently creative. Um, so our ideas about creativity are very stunted. That's another of the major themes in the book that I hope I can break through some of that very limiting, concretized idea of creativity as this possession, that it can be blocked, and to also balance those new perspectives with, again, the idea of devotion that one has to show the creative spirit, um, the miraculous, as Oliver would say, that we are ready. There's a preparation. There is a sometimes a long period of waiting, but showing up, presenting ourselves to that force.
Mm. Yeah, I think signaling to the psyche or the muse or to the creative spirit that I'm ready, willing, and hopefully able, but we'll see. And so some of the ways to do that, like I think about having in art space, even just set up and ready to go, or having your instruments out of their cases and breathing and calling to you, not muffling them by stuffing them in the closet, you know? How are some of the ways that you encourage people to signal to the creative spirit that I'm ready? And yeah.
Very much the same, having your materials ready at hand. Um, Setting your A effort. Maybe you're a night owl and you really come alive at night. So getting into a habit of giving some A quality time to your creative pursuits. And maybe you're just going to sit there, to be willing to survive and endure many sessions, perhaps, of nothing coming. But I also turn to the poet Stanley Kunitz in the book and in my work with clients, where he he believed, and he lived into over 100. He was over 100 when he died, and he was a creative person who balanced a teaching life and being a husband and this avid gardener. He had this very multifaceted, interesting human life. Um, but there's one place in his book Wild Braid, which is an interview with him near the end of his life, where he says that there's no formula for entering into the unconscious. And he uses the Jungian phrase, not a Jungian, but it's so interesting to hear creative people use depth psychological language.
Mhm.
He wrote that there's no set formula, but what you have to do is stop grasping, stop trying to control a relationship with the unconscious, and show the unconscious that you are, quote, a friendly host. And
Mm.
I love that term, that just like we would do for like a wild animal that keeps coming into our yard, that or little hummingbirds that we want to try to feed, and we spend time, maybe one day we just hold the little seeds out there and the birds never come, and we go back out the next day and we hold them and they get a little closer and a little closer, and then one day they're there because they trust us. So I think it has something to do with honoring that the creative spirit, the unconscious, the muse, the miraculous is autonomous. It is waiting for us to make a a generous step in its direction, but and waiting for us to show patience with it
Mm.
and to be that friendly host.
Mm. I love that. Um, because if we're not connected to our creative spirit, and it's not just kind of flowing through us, it's often because of some shame around yourself as an artist, creator, singer, whatever. And so there's a real sensitivity there, the creative soul, especially when it's wounded, which it often is. And so we have to, yeah, it might be timid. It might be afraid to come out and play. So showing it that you're a friendly host, that you're offering a safe space for it to emerge without fear of judgment. Yeah, that's really beautiful to treat that part of yourself in that way. Like, yeah, like an animal that, is going to be timid and cautious. But you show it, you put out a little food one day and yeah,
Yeah.
that's lovely.
And it may not even be a part of you. It may have an autonomy all its own. When we think about, the
Right.
unconscious or the creative spirit,
Mhm.
whatever that force is, I think it needs to know that we really care and that we have the wherewithal to stick out a relationship.
Mm. Hmm. We're not going to abandon it if it doesn't show up in the way that we want it to or expect it to, something like that.
Yes.
Mhm. Well, this has been really lovely. Talking about probably all of my favorite things.
Mine too. I mean, it's really flown by, and it's been a
I
great
know.
conversation, Brian.
Well, thanks for allowing me so much time because yeah, I just looked at the clock and it's like, oh my God, it's almost been 2 hours. So thank you so much for that. I've really enjoyed it. And I love this book. It's going to be one of those books that I just keep around to dip into every now and again. Because it offers things that I haven't seen in other places. And you reference some of my favorite parts of Jung and parts of Hillman and like Mary Oliver and Susan Rowland and all these folks. So it's just a wonderful collection for anyone who wants to reimagine or revision what creativity is and how they are a creative spirit or have an access to the creative spirit, however we think about it. I'm being careful now not to be possessive about
Yeah,
creativity, thanks to you. So reworking the language around it too. So not my creativity, that kind of thing, but like you say in the book, the creative.
creative. Like the very first hexagram of the I Ching is the creative.
Hmm,
So if you can host that with humility, then I think you are fulfilling a very important destiny.
hmm. Great. Well, I'll include links to the book and your creative mentoring service down in the description below. Thanks again. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Brian.
All right, take care. Bye, Mary.